And this is one of the riskiest business that anybody can talk about. Some people will use this aircraft only for a business or a leisure purpose. Some of the risk may be excluded from the aircraft liability policy. How are you going to calculate the loss altogether? Good morning and welcome to this session 5 in Unit 3 in Principles and Practice of General Insurance. And we are going to talk about a very interesting sector known as the aviation sector. So the aviation and hull liability, this is the insurance that we are going to see from the perspectives of the general insurance body altogether. Now moving further, let's first try to understand what is an aviation and a hull liability altogether. Now you see a nice aircraft that is just taken off in the skies. And this is one of the riskiest business that anybody can talk about. So I would always say an aircraft liability and hull insurance protects the firms that uses aeroplanes and other aircraft for business purposes. Now, one side you have commercial airlines company which are full-fledged into the travel and tourism business. But then there are also private airlines company which use airlines for business purpose altogether. So in whichever section you are trying to use your aeroplanes, you're using your aircraft business, we have a protection plan to stop you from any kind of losses or any untoward emergencies. Now the aircraft aren't covered under standard liability. That's a very important point here that you need to note. Aircraft will not be covered under any forms of standard liabilities at any given point of time. Why? Because we have a separate aviation policy for that. Now, moving forward, what is aircraft liability and the hull liability altogether, the hull insurance? Now, many firms use airplanes, jets or helicopters for business purposes, which is a quite norm in the modern days. Some of them use them occasionally for a special project or a business related social outing. Others like crop dusting business, aerial mapping, companies use aircraft regularly. Now look at the usage factor that I'm trying to talk about. Some people will use this aircraft only for a business or a leisure purpose. Some people might use the same aircraft for a business related factor, like when I'm talking about an aerial mapping or when you're going to spray the pesticide or crop dusting altogether. So there is a business side to it, there is a social side to it. So both ways you need to understand these factors of usage of the aircraft, followed by flying will create a unique risk for all businesses that own the aircraft, because as we know, aircrafts are born to come some kind of problems, and this cannot be a guaranteed business altogether. You cannot say that an aircraft that is taken off to the sky will definitely land back in exactly in the same way. There is always a possibility there can be a machine repair, a displacement, or there can be some kind of disorder in the flying arrangement altogether, which can put the life of the passengers as well as the life of the asset, that is the aeroplane, in risk. So that is why we say that accidents are born to happen in terms of the aircraft, and there is a serious injury where you can even lead to death, and 99% it is death. Why? Because when you're going to fall from that height, when the crash is going to happen in the mid-air, in the mid-skies altogether, the replacement of life or the replacement of the aircraft is almost impossible. So that is why we need to cover ourselves with an insurance that will be able to cover the aircraft as well as the life. Going forward, let us look into this factor, how an aircraft liability and a hull insurance works. Aircraft liability from the insurers include the Great American, the QBE, which is also one of the big ones, the arch cover, third party bodily injury, and the property damage claims against the aircraft owner or the operator. So in case, what we are trying to look here is that we have sometimes when the factors of a third party injury or the body crash and all those kind of factors are covered under this. Now the aircraft liability will cover, the policies include three types of liability. One is a bodily injury or death sustained by third parties. other than the passengers. So the pilots and the cabin crew. Now, bodily injury or death sustained by the passengers. Now, passengers are also included in the coverage, followed by damage to the property owned by third parties. So if there is going to be a damage that is going to be owned to a third party, that is also going to be covered in this particular factor, in this particular coverage, followed by how the aircraft liability and hull insurance work. Now, how does it work? If your insurer insists on a bodily injury submit, try to avoid the person per limit that will restrict the payouts, because that is not going to work out at that point of time. Rather than for the people as well as the passengers, instead of that, opt per passenger. That's how the calculation will start working. What I'm trying to say here is that we are not going to limit this insurance by saying that it is per person limit kind of thing, which may restrict the payouts for the people. Rather, go by the per passenger. So based on which, what will now happen is that the coverage will be calculated per passenger, which will limit only the coverage for the passengers. A per person limit means you could be liable only if there are non-passenger extensively injured or sues for a damage beyond your policy limit. So when you say per person, you might not be including your passenger factors inside. You might be including the non-passengers alone. So that's why this liability, you need to look out clearly where you go per passenger rather than per person altogether. Now, moving further, the liability exclusion. Some of the risk may be excluded from the aircraft liability policy. What are those factors? Expected or intended injury. You know that there is going to be an injury, or you have wantedly gone ahead and made an injury. You have wantedly gone ahead and made a scenario like that. Then we call it as an expected or an intended injury. Bodily injury to the employees. If there is going to be any kind of physical injury that is being undertaken by an employee is hurt because of an accident, that is going to be covered in the case that is going to be excluded there. Now, the liability imposed under Workers' Compensation Act, we are not going to deal with any kind of Workers' Compensation Act there. Contractual liability that is going to come into picture when you assume that you are going to sign a contract, that is also going to be excluded out of this policy. No contractual liabilities, no Workers' Compensation Act or any kind of bodily injury to the employees, or you are not going to take into any intended injuries at any point of time. Followed by injury or damage caused by the application of fertilizers and other substances. Now, these are all external factors. These are all the external chemical substances that could create some sort of damage or some sort of injury, which we are not going to get into it. Or the injury or damage caused by pollution, noise, or electrical machine failures, and all those factors will not be covered under this insurance. Now, moving further, the aircraft hull insurance, which I would like to talk about, to ensure the physical damage to an, when we start looking into this factor of saying the hull insurance, to insure against the physical damage to an aircraft, business need to purchase aircraft hull insurance. So any kind of physical damages that needs to be avoided, we need to buy an hull insurance. Many policies offer 3 coverage options. Let's look at the 3 coverage. First one, ground and flight. So when the flight is grounded, when it is there, when it's parked, and that level, and when the flight is in action, covers damage to the aircraft caused by any peril, which means including disappearance, not specifically excluded whether the damage occurs when the aircraft is in ground or in the air. So for example, any kind of disaster that is happening, flood or lightning or thunder or something struck on that, on a riot happened, a fire caught, any kind of incident that happens here, that will be covered here, and including disappearance. Suddenly the flight disappears in the wind, it gets completely moved away from the radar, then automatically that kind of insurance is going to come into picture. Moving further, aircraft hull insurance will also have the next one called as not in flight. Not in flight covers the damage that occurs while the aircraft is in the ground whether stationary or in motion. Now, for example, when the aircraft is in the ground, it is not yet taken up. It has not moved forward, but it is in the ground. It might be in stationary, or it has just to pick up the motion. So that is what we say not in flight. It is not in the air. It is still in the ground. At that point of time, the aircraft hull insurance is also included. Not in motion. Now, this will cover the damage that occurs to the aircraft when it is in ground and in stationary mode. At any given point of time, if the aircraft is found moving, or if the aircraft is in the flight mode altogether, then the insurance will not be picked up at this juncture. Followed by the hull coverage typically excludes damage caused by the wear and tear. The depreciation factors will not be counted here. Electrical breakdown, war-related perils, for example, terrorist attack will not be included here. Excessive heat, hijacking, or any kind of confiscation by a government authority. Now, these kind of things are not a part of the insurance package. So, terrorist attack, or there is going to be a peril of war, or if you have crossed into the international boundary, the international airspace, and you have been confiscated by the government, that's by then another government or an enemy government altogether, we are not going to give you insurance at that point of time. So, both not in flight and not in motion will cover this option, saying that excluding damage caused by fire and explosion following the crash or collision that happens in the aircraft when it was in flight. So what we are trying to do here is that both in the case of flight and not in motion, that is not in flight and not in motion coverage, options exclude the damage. They will remove that damage part caused by fire and explosion following a crash or collision that occurred while the aircraft was in flight. So in the motion, in the air flight, if there's going to be some sort of a crash or fire factor happening, then we are going to exclude it altogether. Now, the loss calculation, how are you going to calculate the loss altogether? Now, you will calculate the loss based on the claims are based on the agreed value of the plane. So, let's say the cost of the plane is $200 million. So, you are going to say that this is the agreed value of the plane. So, based on this, you are going to claim the insurance. If an aircraft is declared as a total loss, the insurer will pay its agreed value. The agreed value is 200 million. You will pay that agreed value. If the plane suffers a partial loss, the nose got damaged, the body got damaged, the wing got damaged, at that time the amount of the insurer pays depends on the performance of the repairs, depending on the repairability. Whatever expenses that are going to occur there, we will be able to pay you that much. Followed by, now in the loss calculation, if the plane is repaired by someone other than the insured, such as an aviation repair shop, the policy typically pays the cost to repair, that's it, or to replace the damaged property, plus the cost of transporting the plane to and from the repair facility. So from that level, from the repair shop back to the airport, back to the place where the plane has to be there, it is going to be covered altogether. The policy pays for, if the insured is also going to perform the repairs, the labor, overhead charges, transportation costs, moving of the plane, all these factors are going to be covered in terms of the repair, in terms of the partial damage that is going to happen to the plane. Now, if the aircraft is declared as a total loss, the insurer will pay the agreed value, as we saw that. If the plane suffers partial loss, then he will depend on the factor. Now, if the plane is repaired by someone, it moves to the aviation, and then the overhead labor cost is automatically calculated. Now, that is a very, very important factor. And then we go on to the warranties altogether. The warranty is a promise by an insurer saying that certain requirements have been met. If the promise is broken, then the insurer can void that policy. Aircraft policies contain warranties that are unique to the industry. So the warranty factor is very much unique to the aviation industry. What does it say? That certain requirements have to be met before the promise, to keep up the promise. If the promise is broken, then the insurer can void the policy. He can say that that policy does not work out at all. Now let's look at it. First, a pilot warranty states that if the plane will be piloted only by the person named in the declarations or by someone who meets the specific qualification described in the policy. So anybody cannot take out a plane and drive it and say that, sir, I had taken it for a casual ride. Now, the person who is being been declared in the policy that he is capable of flying a plane and he is meeting the specific qualification. Let's say in India, the specifications are given by the DGCA, the Director General of Civil Aviation, who will be giving out who is the person who is going to pilot it, who is the person who is going to give the qualifications. All those factors depend on that, and based on this there would be a piloting motion altogether. If the plane is piloted by someone else, the policy affords no coverage. So that is where I'm trying to say, if the plane is going to be taken up by someone who's not mentioned in the policy, who's not meeting the specific qualifications altogether, then automatically the warranty will not hold good at all. Now, moving further, similarly, an airworthiness warranty avoids the policy. It goes on to the void level if the insured aircraft does not have a valid airworthiness certification. There are federal rules, regulations which will go ahead and certify a plane, whether this plane has got an airworthiness, whether it is credible enough for flying, whether it is qualified enough for flying. All these factors have to be taken into account before you start getting into the matter of taking the policy. So that is why we say that the regulations will first get into picture. They say that they prohibit the use of any aircraft that does not have this creditworthiness. So automatically when you talk about the Civil Aviation Authority or when you talk about any of the International Travel Regulation Authority, they will check for the airworthiness of the aircraft. If the airworthiness is not found, automatically the insurer will not give any coverage to it. Followed by, with this I come to the conclusion of this particular session. I hope and believe that the session was of a great use and of a resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we will be talking more about the interesting factors of the general insurance which are in the modern trend today. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.